Tommy Desmond here. It's good to talk to you and meet you on Monday. And I did not get a chance yesterday when I got home. I did not get home until much later than I expected. My inspection ran late, and then I ended up having lunch with the client or dinner with the client after, and I didn't get home until 10, and then I just went to bed. So this morning I sat down to go through your property list here. That you specifically had started talking about the Grosse Pointe property. So I'll start there. And what I'm going to do here is basically I'm going through the MLS. This is Real Comp, which is one of the multiple MLSs that are out there that we can use to get active real estate data. At the moment, they all share information with each other through something called the Great Lakes Repository. This is a new scenario that has just manifested over the last couple months. Prior to that, they were all separate. They all had different information. So all right, getting into it, basically the way that this process works is we will extract, when we're valuing a piece of property, we want to get the trends for the pricing in the area to see if the numbers that they're talking about are going to make sense. So when you buy a piece of property or you sell a piece of property, you are doing it two times. Once to the person who's actually going to purchase it, second time to the appraisers. So whether you're an investor or you're a buyer or a seller, you have to know not only how much you think the market will give you for a piece of property, but also then what the financing companies who are going to give loans on those properties are willing to give up. And at the moment, getting properties to appraise is a little more difficult than finding buyers for properties. So the way that we start with this is I have drawn a quarter-mile radius around the 393 Mount Vernon property in Royal Oak, or in Grosse Pointe Farms, I'm sorry, and I'm pulling up basically everything in all of the status types, and that's active, expired, pending, sold, all of those types around this area, and it gives me a map of basically this quarter-mile radius and all of the activity that's occurred in that area over time. This case is the last 90 days I've got it marked for, which is typically what appraisers will use, so that's why I use that same number. So your subject property is located here, and you are seeing that by comparison to the other properties around the area, it is one of the more expensive properties. However, when you actually dig into the data here, and market-wise, what he is specifically asking, if we sort this by our statuses, he is specifically asking 321.3. So basically, he's not asking anything different from you than anybody else that he's got up on the market, so you don't have any of those concerns. He's basically just selling this thing outright, and the reality is that for his space in his market right here, he is not asking an insane price at all. Actually, he's asking a pretty decent price for that property, and that is in a pretty decent section of Grosse Pointe Farms. Actually, there's a lot of activity going on over there. On the whole, Grosse Pointe is it's a very weird community over there. They've got a handful of things that are good about Grosse Pointe, and there's a handful of things that are not so good about it. One of the trajectories of it is it's hard to tell whether or not it's going up or going down. Really comes down to what Detroit as a city ends up doing. Specifically, the northeastern part of Detroit that abuts Grosse Pointe at the southern border. And if there starts to be a renaissance of that area, then Grosse Pointe is a very strong scenario. If there is not, and anything happens during, to disrupt Detroit's current explosive revival, then, Grosse Pointe doesn't have as much strength moving forward. However, it's still a very rich community with a ton of beautiful homes. So, I mean, it's not like this place is going to fall over and die anytime real soon. Anyway, looking into it, what we're actually looking at here, I mean, the way that I will break most things up is into price per square foot, because that allows me to eliminate the variability between houses. So when you look at, this property on Moran or McKinley, and say, oh, they want $279 for this property, or $289 for this property, but they want $321 for this property. It's very easy to say, well, this one's more. But however, when you break into a price per square foot scenario and you see, okay, well, each one of these is 1972, 1953, 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bath. They all have basements. All the rest of the stuff is the same. The reality is this $279.9 that they're asking for McKinley for this 1,900 square foot house is actually more expensive, because it's $142 a square foot. Same when we go into this 1,953 square foot house on McKinley. They're asking 148 a square foot. Keep going. Moran's asking 151. And then we've got another one on McKinley and Fisher. They're both smaller properties, 1,500 and 1,800. And they're asking 124 and 123. So the reality is that this Mount Vernon property is the third cheapest priced property in the area. It's 2,338 square feet, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath. $137 a square foot is a very good number, especially when you go down and you start looking at what other things have sold for in the area. So the way an appraiser is going to work is they're going to, I mean, actives don't count for appraisers because you can ask for anything you want. I could sell my house in Troy, which is worth about $300,000. I can put it on the market for $500,000 or $2 million tomorrow, and there's nothing that stops me from doing that. The reality is that nobody's going to buy it for $2 million, and an appraiser sure as hell isn't going to appraise it for $2 million. But I can ask for it. So for that reason, the active numbers don't count for anything to an appraiser. They're primarily concerned with the sold numbers because that's actually a recorded record of what has happened in the market, and they can actually use that. So jumping into the solds as our top tier up here, we got, and these are all within the last 90 days. Again, I think the furthest one back we've got off-market date in March, May, April, March, April. I mean, these are all current properties as far as everyone's concerned. And then pending are properties that are in the middle of getting sold. They don't necessarily factor in as much for an appraiser, but if you see a lot of dramatic price changes in pendings and the properties that are pending are very comparable, what I will do is call these listing agents and ask, hey, this is what, because until they sell it, it doesn't get recorded as a sold price. It just gets recorded as the listing price. That's what they're showing. But when you actually sell it and it gets sold, they'll show you what it actually closed for. So you can see here in this investment view that I have, list price, close price. There's only close prices indicated for the sold properties because these haven't closed yet. So even though these are pending, we don't necessarily know what they're going to close at. And in some cases, there's some substantial differences between these. So, for example, on this one, this McMillan Road we're looking at here, the list price was $333, but it closed at $370. So that means that it sold in 5 days for $50,000 over market value, over what they were asking, $40,000 over. So that was $161 a square foot. And that basically gives appraisers a way to trend what's going on. And if we're noticing a lot of very comparable properties that are pending and we want to know if that's about to happen, I'll call those listing agents and say, hey, what is this accepted offer for? Because we have somebody that's looking to buy, and we want to make sure that the property will appraise or whatever, because that's going to become a sold comp relatively soon. And normally I wouldn't go into all this stuff with a buyer. This isn't normally how I would do this, but since you're also interested in the investing side, I think it's important to kind of go over, how some of this valuation works, at least on the inside and in my mind. So, and I'm not like, there's other people value properties in other ways, but so far I've had some really, really good luck. So I've been pretty precise with the numbers. I have had nothing really come in for under appraised value. I think I had one appraisal come in low, and it was low by like $500, which is like nothing. I mean, problems show up when appraisals come in $20,000 low, not a couple $100. So and even that, I don't think that was even this year, if I remember correctly. So anyway, what we're looking at here for the most part is all these solds and what their closing price per square foot is. So if you are looking at buying a property, where was it? Did I lose it already? Let me go back and find what this one was. Price per square foot for 393 was 137. And the question is, all right, is that a lot of money? Is this guy ripping me off? Is he asking too much money for his house? And we skip in and we see what's actually sold in that area. And we see closed price per square foot, 137, 156, 110, 147, 140, 177, 164, 140, 161. So the reality is that if the house is very nice and move-in ready and comparable to these other properties that have sold, not only is he asking not too much, he's actually asking very little. The only property that is actually cheaper that has recently sold than what he's asking is this one that closed For 110, it was 1,900 square feet. It was $110 a square foot closed. It sold for $215 on Moran Road. And if we take a look at it, let's take a look by comparative sake. It's nice. It is a nice property. I mean, it seems like it's relatively old world. It looks like it has been updated. It's got the original counters. This is a very common cabinet and counter style in this area. My mother actually had probably these exact same cabinets. Probably the same person who made these cabinets made the ones that went into my mother's house in the 50s or the 60s in St. Clair Shores, which is about 4 or 5 miles north of this property. And until we redid the kitchen a couple years ago, basically this was her kitchen. So without the nice new appliances. So that basically is probably where they lost some of the value compared to what the other properties were selling for. Also, they probably just asked too little from the outset. Well, no, they've been sitting on the market for a while here. We've got it sitting on the market for quite a while. It's also right on Moran, which some people might consider negative. Let's see here. There's a few more things. A lot of times you got to go hunt through to see if there's anything that's sticking out as something problematic. That would have caused the property to sit on the market, because by comparison, if you go back here, and now we'll bump up and we'll pull up one of these 177s. So this was 0 days on market, 177 for 290 basically, and it's only 1,600 square feet on Mount Vernon. That's what we're getting over here. All right, so this is a classic brick Grosse Pointe home. They took all the pictures down so we can't see. That's awesome. You know what? They probably never even had any pictures up because it had already sold. They didn't bother hiring a photographer because this property sold before it was even on the market. They had multiple offers on the thing, so they probably sold it inside their agency, and it was off market. They didn't pay there was no point in paying the photographer, so they just didn't even bother taking pictures. Let's see. This one sold in 5 days on McMillan. This is the one that went from 133 was the listing price. Sold price was 370. So, I mean, this is pretty old world, open floor plan, classic Grosse Pointe. This doesn't shock me at all. They got granite. They redid everything. The power of a redone kitchen is pretty huge. That's pretty much what people focus on, especially in this market. If you've got anything supremely updated, millennials will jump on it. They love it. And, yeah, I mean, it's a very nice house. That's a very aggressive price point. But they got it. They got it. So, basically, yeah. I mean, looking at these numbers and then comparing that property to those, it's definitely got a lot of that classic old world Grosse Pointe. This is definitely a property that people like a lot. It's got the wainscoted walls. Yeah, it's nice. I mean, it's been updated. Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, just looking through this, the bathroom's a little bit dated. That's probably where they're getting a little bit of the days on market time, but that's not going to hold up the property too much longer, because this isn't brutal dating. I mean, this is what they were doing a lot of in the 80s and the 90s. This was the updating of that period. So, I mean, this tile floor, you see a lot of this in this area. So, if they had updated that, they've got one of the bathrooms updated, the master. So yeah, this is a nice property. I mean, for that number, yeah, he's probably going to get it. It's probably sitting there for a minute. He's using one of these smaller brokerages, so it's probably sitting there a little bit longer, only because he hasn't got one of the big brokerages that have the bigger brokerages have larger internet push, and everything's on the internet right now. Plus, a lot of these smaller guys they run real estate the old school way, and that doesn't sell properties as fast as the new school way, which is entirely internet based. So that's probably why it's still sitting there now. And if it was with one of the bigger push brokers, it probably would be gone already. So anyway, just as a quick wrap up for this property, yes, I think it's a good number. Honestly, I don't think that it's a negative number at all. I think at some point, historically, he might have even had an offer on this. They're not giving me that information because this is coming from MI Real Source, which is a different MLS. And even though we do share listings, they don't necessarily share all of their all of the data formats aren't the same. So there could be a historical record of this property having an offer put on it, and then them backing out on inspection or on something like that. So yeah, looks like he's only going for cash and conventional loans. So you'd actually have to ask whether or not he would accept a VA loan, because he might not want to go for FHA or VA. A lot of people are hesitant to accept FHA and VA. VA being the most pushed back against from homeowners, and the reason being is that the FHA being government programs, the FHA and the VA loans, they have stipulations that conventional loans or cash deals do not have. For example, the FHA has a more strict inspection process, as does the VA. So a conventional loan will come in and they'll inspect the property and they'll appraise it and they'll say, okay, it's worth the money, go ahead and buy it. The FHA will come in and they've got a lot of this government bureaucracy. They're like, okay, well, you need to fix this, you need to fix that, you need to fix all these things. This doesn't conform to Americans with Disabilities standards, government stuff. And the VA has got even more of that. And not only does the VA have that, the VA also has a handful of things that are somewhat redundant. Like in our area, termite inspections are not really a big deal the way that they are in the South, because we don't really have a high termite scenario. It's not a big deal here, as big of a deal as it would be in the South. However, because the VA is federal, everybody gets a pest inspection, and not only do they get a pest inspection, the seller has to pay for it, because the buyer, as a veteran, can't legally pay for that thing. So basically there's a lot of burdens that get put onto the seller, even though it's still a great loan package. And I mean, a lot of times you can get that. A lot of times you can push it and they'll roll anyway. So if this has been sitting here for a minute and you show up with a VA loan and you want to buy it and you're approved, they're probably still going to entertain you and play ball with it. So and in some ways, this could just be the agent trying to avoid that, and the people might not have ever even said anything about FHA or VA. It could just literally be the agent just plug that in. And in many times, the VA is actually a benefit, because you might be selling this home to a veteran, especially if they're older. If it's an older couple, I mean, there's a higher likelihood that they're going to be veterans, because a lot of, there was the draft. So, I mean, you got a ton of veterans that are in the baby boomer and silent generation. And a lot of times that becomes a sticking point that they prefer, once they realize that it's, what's going on. So, anyway, that's it. This is generally how I'm going through and valuing property, and how I'm coming up with the idea of whether or not a property is worth an offer, is not worth an offer. If this was an investment property, I would be looking at those same price per square foot numbers in the same way. Go back. I'd be looking at those same price per square foot numbers, but I would be asking myself, say if I was pulling up if I wanted to invest in this area and I drew a circle around it, I would be pulling up this list and saying, okay, well, if the recent solds, the biggest number that I can get is 178, that would be my maximum ARV after repair value on a 1,400 square foot house. My next step would be to take a look for properties that were around that or under. So here we got an 1,800 square foot and it's going for 124. So my goal would be, now none of these numbers look particularly great. Here was an expired that expired for 112, and that's 1,900 square feet. So I'd have some questions for this person. Expired means it came off the market without selling. Oh, it's this guy. So this guy clearly is having a problem getting rid of the house. So it expired after 17 days. And he's got it active on the market still in another way. Where are we at? Oh, no, I was the one that sold for 112. I'm sorry. So those are two separate listings. But say that person hadn't sold and it was sitting there expired, that'd be a person to call up and they didn't get 112 and say it sat on the market for 6 months and they didn't get their 112. Now that that's expired, you can go contact that person and say, hey, I noticed you were trying to sell your house. I got $200,000 for you. Would you sell for $200,000? So if you take that, I have spreadsheets that do this for me, but just to be quick about it, they will take that, multiply it, or divide it by the square footage. We're talking about $102 a square foot. So if I can get a property for $102 a square foot and then spend $10 or $20 a square foot to bring it up to a standard by which it would sell for between $140 and $150, $160 a square foot, then that largely is the underlying methodology for what it is you're trying to do as a real estate investor, what the goal is, how you're trying to do this analysis. And it gets more complex. Like I could show you one of our spreadsheets that we actually use to plug a lot of this data in to get real precise with our comps, because we'll go through and we'll actually do whole breakouts, real specific breakouts for our costing, for the rehabs, our holding costs, our quiet costs, like our closing costs, or the other agents that are involved, not just on our purchase side, but when we turn around to sell it again, we're going to have to pay commissions when we sell it. So we're paying double commission hits a lot of times. Even though I'm the listing agent for my own properties, I don't have to list and charge myself a ton of commission. I still have to charge a little because my broker doesn't want me to charge nothing. And there's going to usually be a buyer's agent commission on the flip side. So you're going to pay taxes while you're holding it. You're going to pay, if you're borrowing money, there's going to be private money costs that go into it. If you got the lights on the whole time, you got workmen in there, you got permitting and inspection costs. Those things all have to be factored in, and they have to be added to your acquisition cost per square foot, and compared to your ARV sale price, and the profit has to be calculated as a fallout between those two numbers. So that's basically that. And as far as, I won't go through, all of these other properties. I'm not going to do like a video for each of this, but basically I'll look up the rest of these and tell you kind of, if they're worth it. But just immediately looking at the Loganaw property in Warren, they're asking $160 for that, and yeah, that's pretty. That's not too far off for what that area is asking. I still haven't looked up Hillcrest, which I guess we can do. I'll save this and let you view it, and then you can kind of figure out, that's what I'm going to be doing with the other properties as well. But this gives you a brief overview of kind of how I come to my valuations and how I evaluate them relative to other properties.